So, I'm glad we caught that, because Mark and I think I heard 2 a minute ago. We thought we were getting cut in half already. But thank you all. Thank you for Jeff for having us, and thanks to WRA and the leadership here and all of you for coming out. It is a pleasure to be back in this hall. Many of you heard me a little bit yesterday, but I'm glad to have a little bit more free dialogue here and not just talk at people, but talk with you. I live in Wauwatosa with my wife and our 2 sons, Matt and Alex, obviously in Milwaukee County, the largest county in the state. But I grew up not too far down the way in Walworth County in a town called Delavan, about 8,000 people, and a few Delavan folks. And I think back to that time. My dad was a minister there. My mother raised us, and certainly they were a great influence. I think of other influences back in Delavan over the years. I was in sports, probably like many people here, and learned a lot about teamwork. I was in Scouts, was in Eagle Scouts. I learned a lot about about leadership there. I had the honor of going to the Badger Boys State, a program that was put on by the American Legion, and so much more so than just government or politics, I learned from those veterans a lot about public service and the importance that if you're running for office, you should be running not to be somebody great, but rather to do something great. But probably one of the most significant influences I think about these days is my grandmother. My grandmother lost her husband, my grandfather, in 1974, and up until 2 years ago, when she passed away, she had lived by herself. And her own apartment, took care of herself. We checked in on her. But throughout all those years, she was very frugal in getting by. In fact, I think there were times as a kid when we'd go to McDonald's where I swear they paid her to eat there as opposed to us paying to eat there. But over the years, I really was drawn to a lot of what she taught me. She lived through the Great Depression, and a lot of that applied to her life and what she taught to her daughter and to her grandkids. And these days, I like to think, we all called her frugal. I like to think I'm frugal. My wife just calls me cheap. But I still drive the same Saturn from 1997. I bought, commuting back and forth here. I still pack a lunch each day. In fact, I had my 2 ham and cheese sandwiches earlier today in the courthouse. And for me, that's just important to not only for me, but then I treat your money, the taxpayers' money, just like I treat my own. And so we've just started recently a brown bag tour where we go around the state from one place to another, from a factory or business, and we not only sit down with the owner, but we talk with the workers there while they're eating lunch, not only to tell what I would do, but to hear a little bit about their hopes and concerns, their dreams and their fears, all at the same time, and tell what we would do to help make those dreams a little bit better in the future. And I have a real simple guide I talk about. We call our brown bag guide to government. One in particular my grandmother would love today, and that is don't spend what you have. Don't spend any more than you have. Wouldn't it be nice if the people in the Capitol actually abided by that here and in Washington? Another one that's similar to that, I think she'd appreciate, is smaller government is better government. And probably the most important one, particularly these days as we talk about the economy, is that people create jobs, not government. I think that's certainly true, as you all know. The jobs that you create, the dreams that you have, the people you work with in the community, the communities that you represent, that's ultimately the key here, is that people create jobs, not the government. Now, that's a bit unlike this governor and, frankly, the mayor who would seek to follow him, Mayor Barrett. They very much put their faith in the government. They believe that more government spending, more programs, more taxes will be the answer to our problems. I think getting government out of the way and empowering the people and employers that have made this state great in the past, and even more so will make it greater in the future, is the answer to our problems. Getting government out of the way when it comes to our tax burden, our litigation burden, our regulation burden, enabling us to have more power and control locally over our schools and our education system, making sure that the health care we have in this state is addressed by making it more affordable for all of you in the private sector to purchase through market-driven strategies and not through government mandates and intervention. Making sure that we have a strong infrastructure system when it comes to power and when it comes to transportation. Those are all things we can do to get government out of the way so that you can ultimately put more people to work. And as more people are put to work in this state, more people are going to buy homes. More people are going to buy real estate. More people are going to be involved in pushing the state's economy forward. Yesterday, when I spoke in front of the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, I laid out an ambitious goal, a plan to create 250,000 jobs by the end of my first term and 10,000 new businesses. I believe the way you get there is not through new government programs, but fundamentally through getting government out of the way. I believe in this state. I believe in Wisconsin. I believe in our employees. We've got a great workforce. I believe in our employers. We've got tremendous employers in this state. We've got great natural resources, an abundant quality of life. Traveling around the state, what I've found time and time again is what is failing us in this state is not our people or our places. What is failing us is our government. And come this November, on November 2nd of 2010, we the people of Wisconsin can take that government back. We can put it on the side of the people again. We can make this a state we believe in. Thanks for the chance to share.
Answer to that.
Well, there's no doubt the overall principle is to get the economy going, you got to get government out of the way. As I mentioned yesterday, I talked about 6 points. I'll mention 3 of them specifically. Cutting taxes, easing regulations, reducing litigation. Those will help not only those of you in the industry, they'll help all the people who are your potential customers, the home buyers and real estate acquirers out there. Because right now, it's the economy that's driving it. The economy is driving the lack of home sales right now. We've got to get more money into more people's hands and out of the hands of government. When it comes to taxes, it's across the board. We've got to reduce tax on employers. And a lot of times people mistakenly think that's just corporate. Certainly we want to introduce corporate income tax in the state to encourage more job growth and expansion here. But really one of the mistakes, and we saw this last year in the budget, is when they raised the individual income tax, they ignored the reality that most businesses in this state pay taxes on the individual income tax. When they changed the capital gains deductions, they affected the ability to invest in Wisconsin businesses, particularly at the small and mid-level basis. We've got to not only repeal those increases, we've got to reduce the tax burden. We've got to truly cap off property taxes, something I've got a first-hand experience on. I've done 8 consecutive budgets, unlike anybody else out there, Republican or Democrat. I've actually produced 8 straight budgets without increasing the property tax levy from the previous year. We did it, by controlling spending. We cut our debt by over 10% already. By 2012, my outstanding debt will be out 28% down from where it was when I first started. My workforce is down 23%. My bond rating, even while the state's bond rating went down the past 8 years, ours went up. Last year, when the state had the largest budget surplus ever, we actually had a surplus. And we still did it by protecting quality of life things that matter for your home sales. In our case, Joe Winnicke, when I first announced last April, used to run around the state saying, wow, he's done all that, he's held the line on taxes, but he's gutted things in Milwaukee County. He went after the parks. Well, he doesn't say that anymore. You know why? Because we won the gold medal for the best park system in the country last October. So we understand quality of life, whether it's that, whether it's eliminating the waiting list for long-term care services for older adults, which was thousands before I came, in which there's not one person today on a waiting list. All those things we did while but controlling spending, controlling taxes. If we can do it in Milwaukee County and take on the machine there, there's no doubt we can do it here in Madison. You add to that regulations, reducing the size and scope of regulations, making them science-based and really ultimately predictable. That certainly affects, you think about home sales around lakefronts in particular. The DNR alone can totally muck up your home sales for anybody who's, like I did, lived near a lake in Delavan, but that's true all across the state. There are so many things that stand in the way of prosperity and stand in the way of home sales, and certainly litigation. If we ease litigation in the state, we passed a bullet this last year when Jim Doyle's proposal to reduce joint and several liability down to 1% was defeated. But we shouldn't be playing defense. We got to be playing offense, and we should be getting nuisance and frivolous lawsuits out of the way so our residents and our employers can put more people back to work. It also means when we talk about taxes and fees, not piling them on in other days. The real estate transfer fee was another way to gouge people as part of the home sales. We've got to make sure we've got a governor who not only personally understands that, but puts men and women of character from across the state who have that sort of personal experience in key places as the budget director, as the director of administration, and other key elements across the state government. I've shown I can do that with the cabinet I put in place, and I certainly do that as your next governor.
Okay, now if you're going to have a question, we have the microphones up here, so if you can start lining up now, and then I'll just ask a question in the meantime. Scott, let's start with you on this one. You talked about your projection of 250,000 new jobs by 2015. How'd you come up with 250? Why not 150, 300? Or?
Well, I think that's a minimum.
That's a minimum.
That's a platform for us, and our belief is, and so it's clear, because I think that's different than what Governor Doyle. It's certainly what's different. It's too bad, and I understand the mayor's got an appropriate reason for not being here today, but there's been plenty of other times where, unlike Mark and I who've been on the podium together, the mayor doesn't appear on the podium with us. Today's an appropriate reason for that, but I think he and his campaign don't want that comparison. Their comparison is, if the reality is out there, that if you elect Tom Barrett, it will be a third term for Jim Doyle. There's not a policy or an issue where they differ. They tried to differ a little bit on global warming, but the reality is he just said he wanted to modify it. He didn't really say what it was, and he actually said at one of your lunches back in December that if he was governor, one of his priorities, if it didn't pass this time, would be to enact the global warming legislation. There's a clear difference between what Governor Doyle and Mayor Barrett have, which is a belief that government creates jobs, government programs spur jobs. My belief is you get government out of the way. We looked at projections in the past, particularly previous to 2008. We looked at what we believe based on other states that have aggressive growth agendas in place. You look at just one. This is not the sole one we looked at. But Texas has no income tax. They have major tort reform. And most importantly, they have a pro-job, pro-business governor. In that one state a year ago, Texas created more jobs in one state than all 49 states combined. There's no doubt we can't, there's no reason why we can't do that. We've got everything else. We've got the quality of life. We've got the resources. We've got the employer base, the supplier base. We've got the great workforce. We've got all the things that are important to do business. The biggest barriers we have right now are barriers brought on by the government at both the state and the local levels. And if we can get that out of the way, my argument has been if we could do that in Milwaukee County with the government there, with the challenges we've got there, under the city of Milwaukee, the mayor's city's got about 11% unemployment. Even with those challenges, we've helped other parts of our county reduce that. There's no doubt we could, enacting those principles of getting government out of the way, we could not do that in a way that got at least 250,000 more jobs created by the end of our first term and another 10,000 employers.
Okay.
Well, there are many, many reasons to be passionate about education. In my case, there are two specific ones, Matt and Alex. Those are my two sons who go to Wauwatosa East High School, just like I went to Delavan Darien High School when I was a young person as well. And as a parent, obviously I have a passion, but I know in a larger sense as someone who looks to be the leader of this state and this state government, that plays a fundamental role, not just only because it's inherently a priority to have a quality education system available for every young person in the state, but also because it ties into our state's economy. It ties into our workforce. It definitely ties into every realtor I've ever talked to, not just location, but a good chunk of the location is how close to a good school system are you? How close to a good school are you? We have, one thing I want to make clear, we have good schools in Wisconsin. We even have good schools in the Milwaukee area. The problem is we don't have enough of them, and we don't have them across the board. And so we need leadership not only from government, not only from education leaders, but from community, from civic, from business leaders to make those good schools not the exception but the norm in every part of the state of Wisconsin. Part of it, you asked Jeff about the formula. I'd say in the larger sense, like in business, you got to step back and take a bigger view as what is your objective. In my case, it's not even just a great public school system. I think we have to have an opportunity for every young person and every family in the state to have access to the best education possible within obvious financial means, but the best education possible. And for some, it's going to be at a traditional public school setting. For others, it's going to be at a charter school. For some in Milwaukee, it's going to be a choice school. For others across the state, it's going to be at a private school. And for even others, it's going to be in a homeschool situation. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers amongst that mix. We should be providing access to whatever every family and every individual student within that family believes is the most important and most effective way for that young person to get a quality and outstanding education in this state, because that's vital not only to their future, it's fundamentally vital to this state's future. I think that means in part changing the school aid formula, a formula that wasn't just built for the 20th, but in many ways for the 19th century, into one that's built for the 21st century. We don't do enough to encourage and enhance technology and innovation from one school district to the other, to do things that make it easier, not so much to collapse districts, but to consolidate our kids, my kids. I was talking with the university system folks last night. I mean, my kids have no problem doing things online. My generation's a little bit harder to imagine something. My kids want to learn how to tie a tie. They don't ask me. They go on YouTube, and they figure out how to do it watching a video. We don't have that sort of built into our system and our funding and everything else to encourage better use of our technology and our innovations out there. We need to do that across the board. Specific to Milwaukee, there is no doubt the one thing I think all of us would agree is the Milwaukee public school system is broken. I do not agree, do not support the mayoral takeover of the school system because in any of the places, and there's only a handful where mayoral takeovers worked anywhere in the country, and it had two things: a clear plan and a strong mayor. I said this long before Mayor Barrett got into the race for governor. We don't have either in Milwaukee. The last thing you want to do is make a fundamental change like that and then turn it over to something that will make it worse. I think not only because you have educational problems in Milwaukee, you have an over $2 billion unfunded liability in that school system. With that in mind, from a business standpoint, I think the better alternative is dissolve MPS, start over with 10 to 12 smaller school districts. The effect of achieving school districts across the state have anywhere from 8 to 10,000 people in them. It's too big to have anywhere from 80 to 100,000 students in it. Allow those liabilities to be, in terms of pension and other issues, legacy costs, to be renegotiated. And while we're at it, I love the support that Mark's given to the Hope School system. He's been a great leader on that. I'm proud to say in the Assembly I was one of the key original co-sponsors of that. I've held my State of the County address at the Hope School, at St. Marcus, at other well-achieving choice schools in Milwaukee. I think we should lift the cap. We should say, why cap it off at under 20,000 kids? Lift the cap entirely. Let any well-achieving, well-successful school do whatever it takes to educate more and more and more kids while we're at it. Change the charter rules, change the standards so that more kids have an opportunity to have a great education. If I have the honor of serving as your governor, I'm going to aggressively push those things forward, not just for the kids in Milwaukee, because when you do that, as Mark mentioned, the cost for the voucher school kids are half of what it costs in MPS. Every time there's another kid in the choice program, not only helps that kid get a better education, where the graduation rates fundamentally are better than what they get in the public school system, it helps every other kid in every other school district, because that's more funding back in the school aid formula for every other school district across the state. So that is something we need to do to not only get Milwaukee back on track, but to help all the rest of the state get on track as well.
So up or down?
I'm sorry, on the uniformity clause?
Eliminating the uniformity clause.
The simple answer on that is the governor doesn't get a say on that. If you're going to change it, which what I think raises serious red flags, if you're going to change it, it requires a change in the Constitution, and it takes two consecutive votes in the state legislature through two consecutive terms, and then a vote of the people. They voted it down before. My view is when people have spoken, you don't need to keep asking them. They've been pretty clear on that. I think we need to have other more proactive innovations and reforms within the existing confines of the state's constitution.
Okay, again, state your name and where you're from, please.
Scott Allen from Waukesha. What specifically would you do to eliminate Wisconsin's structural deficit?
Sure. Starting back first.
Yeah.
Scott, good to see you. I didn't recognize you. I haven't seen you with your beard for a while. That's impressive. Good to see you. Well, a series of things. You know what is frustrating to me, one of the biggest frustrations with this current governor and with the tack he's taken in the past couple budgets is even before the market fell apart at the end of 2008, Wisconsin, as of June 30th, the end of the fiscal year in 2008, had the largest gap, generally accepted accounting principles, the largest gap deficit in state history. In fact, if you measure it per cap at the time, it was the largest in the country, larger than California, New York State, New Jersey, Ohio, and these other states. That's because in the past, this governor's deferred things like school aid payments. He raided the transportation fund. He raided the patient compensation fund. The legislature went along with it. But that's just a fundamental gap in leadership. That is something that to get this next budget balanced, let alone just to deal with the structural deficit, but just to get it balanced to begin with, we're going to have to make fundamental across-the-board reforms, not only in how we govern, but in controlling costs. But you got to have a two-pronged strategy. One part is controlling costs, something we've done even in Milwaukee County quite significantly, lowering our debt, lowering our workforce size, getting our bond rating back in track so our debt service payments go down, doing all those things, the sorts of things you'd want out of the next governor. We're going to need to do that program by program. That means dealing with Medicaid fraud. It means adjusting things like Badger Care and Wisconsin Works, the child care program we've all read so much about. Those are two prime examples of large-scale programs that were supposed to be temporary safety nets as people came off of welfare and now become permanent entitlements under this governor. Those things have got to change. We've got to change the way that we set up government. We've got to change all those things, but we also have to have significant wage and benefit reform. And I don't mean that picking on state employees. I mean, I mean, I work for the government too. I know there's a lot of good public servants at the local, state, and other levels of government. But when you look at the difference between what public sector employees, and we saw it, if you saw the report today about pensions and how much bigger they are for public sector retirees than private sector, you know what we're talking about. But when I look at what the public sector pays, whether it's at state government, in my case, the county government, I just got even some of the liberals on my county board this last budget to go along with a fundamental change in our wage and benefit structure. You know, when I looked at what the average employee pays statewide, it's $3,500 for a family plan. The average employer pays about $9,000 for a family plan. You compare that to the plan I inherited, where the HMO cost our employees $840, not per month, annually, and the employer, the county, the taxpayer, picked up more than $16,000 in cost. I said, that's you can't sustain that. That puts us down the path towards financial insolvency that Chrysler and GM are on. The same sorts of things are happening here in state government. In our case, we weren't even asking for, you know, a radical solution. We asked for capping off not having pay increases, stopping the step increases, and asking for a mere $30 a month more in health care premiums. Those are things that not only help balance this budget, but help balance future budgets. We've got 69,000 state employees. We've got to make those sorts of changes, and they're running around saying, I'm going to cut their salaries in half and ridiculous scare tactics like that. We're not. We're not, but we're going to ask for a reasonable amount in comparison to what everybody else pays outside of government. I think that's a reasonable expectation to say. At a time in a society where many people are just grateful to have a job without a pay increase and without cutting their health care off entirely, I don't think it's unrealistic to say that all of us, myself included, if I serve as the next governor, should pay a little bit more like the private sector does. That's one side. The other side, though, and again, we've got a proven track record, we can do that. The other side, though, is I think the balance, not only the budget, but to deal with the structural deficit, you got to have a pro-growth agenda. That's why I fought so hard to control taxes, in this case to actually reduce the tax burden, to reduce the cost of doing business, to get government out of the way of business, because if you do that effectively and boldly enough, I believe that while you're balancing the budget, you can also see that that pro-growth agenda will actually inspire more investment, more opportunity, more growth. I'll give you one specific example. I know Jeff wants me to stop, but one more thing on that. In addition to income taxes, capping property taxes, you look at retirement income in this state. Retirement income, in fact, I'm convinced there's only one reason we have any retiree in the state of Wisconsin left, at least any with an accountant. It's one word: grandchildren. If it wasn't for grandchildren, I mean, financially, not just in Texas or Arizona or Florida or anywhere else, Illinois has got a better tax burden when it comes to retirement income. We need to change that, phase that out, not only so our retirees come back, so that their money comes back. Invested in Wisconsin homes and Wisconsin businesses and Wisconsin banks that can then make Wisconsin loans to Wisconsin companies and Wisconsin homeowners. Those are all fundamental changes. Those are the sorts of things, if you talk to the people in the Capitol, though, and the bureaucrats and Department of Revenue would say, you can't do that. What would we do with all that revenue we'd lose? I say, come with me to the airport. Every day it goes down to Orlando. Every day it goes to Naples. Every day it goes down to Sedona. It's already leaving. Why not turn it around so that those people come back, bring their wealth here, spend their time here, spend their money here, and make investments? We talk all the time about venture capital and angel investors and startup money. The reason we don't have enough of it is not because we don't have enough tax credits. It's we don't have enough wealth in this state, and it's all sitting in some other state. I'd sign that bill into law phasing it out, and then I'd go down to Naples and Sedona and other places where there are concentrations of Wisconsin retirees and have welcome home parties and say it's time to come home and bring your money back. You do that, you could actually stimulate the economy, but equally as importantly, per your question, is actually increase revenue. Just like we saw under Ronald Reagan nearly 30 years ago, under the Laffer curve, if you cut the tax rate, you'll actually see more money coming back into the Treasury.
All right.